Yes, sir.
Well, with the veto system, it was more or less of an incentive. Before, each person used to get just paid so much per hour or so much per day. But with this, you had these people go in and check a different operator to see how much they could do and how much they did do. And then they set a standard. And by that standard, if you went over that, you were paid extra. And of course, that was a great incentive to some of them. And they'd just work themselves to death and never know when to quit. And each time they did that, then when they were checked, it just ran the production up and hurt them. They could not realize that they were doing an injustice, because they, as you know, every person's different, and some could do so much more than others. And in one particular case, we had a lady down there, I'm just not exaggerating, she weighed 300 pounds. She was a big woman. She wasn't just a fat woman. And they called one of these veto men in to check her one day to see what the standard would be. He told them he wasn't going to check her. She couldn't do nothing. But they made him check her, and she liked to work him to death. He says, I will never check her again. And they said, yes. And he had to come over about 3 times, right straight running. And she wasn't smart. She was just flat moving, but she moved faster than normal because he was there. And I was interested there. I said, I wish she realized what she was doing was hurting herself. And in hurting herself, she was hurting people on there that wasn't capable of doing it. And then if you didn't make a certain standard, after so long time, you was taken off the plant. And 9 times time, you were let go. You had a certain length of time before you made standard. As long as you kept making standards, you was all right. But if you went down, it was worse. But then on our job, we only had one timekeeper, as I was telling you, per shift. Well, we had the nicest boss about that. When someone quit in the office or in the line of duty out there, he promoted someone there in the office, and then as they got up, the rest of us was brought forward to the next shift. And I loved my 3rd shift. And he told me one day I'd have to come on the 2nd. I didn't want to. He said, well, you'll always work a 3rd because you'll never get to the 1st and you'll never get to the office because you're going through all shifts before you get there. And then I went on and I stayed with them until I was drafted, of course, in 42. And then, of course, after that, I came back, and opening came, and I was made payroll supervisor, and had these girls working under us, and they didn't know what work was like us that had gone to work when the veto system first came in, and you just couldn't get them to cooperate and do like and keep the jobs up. But they finally learned, and then, of course, in about 1946, I decided I could do something else. So I left Calloway Mills and went to, I didn't do anything for a little while, and then I was hired by the railroad as a demurrage bureau clerk. And I worked on that a while. I loved that, but I told...
Could you go back now and tell us when the veto system was introduced and why?
Well, it was introduced
in about... Start off by saying the veto system.
The veto system was introduced, I would say, about 1934. And it was just to get more production. As I said, it was an incentive, and by giving them this incentive, they got more production out, of course, and it made the things run smoother.
Can you describe what a Beto man did, just as though I'd never seen it?
Well, the first thing he did was he was sent in from another office, and our supervisors where we were would suggest to him who to study and what to study. Then he'd go out there and he'd get the person's name and all that information, and he had to know the machines and what worked and what they were required to do. And they'd have to put down frequency on the jobs that was happening as to the number of times they put on a tube to start yarn up on, and the number of times they took it off, and if they had to put it in a certain box, keep it separated from another one. They had to creel on this, in the winder room in particular, they had to take these bobbins of yarn that was brought in there and run them off on the tubes to make packages. And that's where our job came in. We had to measure those packages and be sure they were running the correct packages that we reported to them. And we also had to go along where they had hand clocks to determine how much production they was doing, and read those and watch them and see that we were reading the right clocks and reading at the right time, and give them the credit for the krills and doffs and what have you.
Now, did the Beto man go around with stopwatches?
Yes.
Just describe, say the Beto man went around with stopwatches.
Well, while the Beto man was checking each operator, whatever operator, he had a stopwatch to see with every frequency that happened, how long it took them to do each frequency. And of course, as he moved from putting tubes on a winder to running it and then tying any brakes and things like that, he was there standing with a stopwatch to get all that recorded, so they'd be sure to know exactly how long a person and how much a person could do. And then after that, they were just on their own until it come time for him to get another operator to make a comparison with the checks. And it just went from one department to the other.
Now, I ran across a story about a Beto man getting run out of town. Why would that happen?
I don't know whether what I'm thinking about or not, but there was one down at Spinning Mill that was run out because
just started. Well, there's the Beto man down to Spinning Mill who got run out of town.
Well, there was a Beto man down at Spinning Mill that got run out of town because he had been a Beto man and had gotten promoted and made a supervisor. But he knew what to do, and he was making production, but he wasn't making it under the right terms that he was supposed to make it. And when they found out, he left.
But
By request.
It wasn't the workers that ran him out then.
No, it was his own behavior that did it.
This story just led me to think that the workers got mad at him and ran him out of town. Yeah. So that didn't happen here.
He was just not following the established procedure.
Yeah.
That's right. Because, he just knew what to do. See, he had been a Beto man himself, and then he got to be supervisor, and he just knew how to make the production harder on the people.
Well, now, I was talking about this with a fellow up in Kannapolis, and he said, oh, there's not much to that when they put in the picker clocks. we learned how to jimmy them up.
Mm-hmm.
Did that ever happen?
Surely did.
Tell us about that.
One night in particular, it was a third shift operator and in the twister room, and he was supposed to be up number one. And my supervisor told me that night when I went in, he met me at the office at 10 o'clock to go in. He says, now you will be checking every hour, on the hour, the clocks on this set of twisters. Says you're not supposed to go in the same order every time. You're not supposed to let them know what you're doing. You're just supposed. So I went on, and that night, and that was 10 o'clock. We went in about 12. He ran his big clocks up to where he'd already have production for the 8 hours. Well, they didn't know I was reading them. And so the next morning, I fixed my report and turned it in on my boss's desk. Went on home, went to bed. Boss called up and told Mama he had to talk to me. I got up and went down there. He says, are you sure that you read those clocks right? I said, I'm absolutely positive. I said, all you got to do is get the shift before that's production, and you'll see that it was there. And he said, would you face the man face to face? I said, yeah, I will. I said, because I read it. I'm not afraid of it. And he called him, and that boy was real upset because he and I had been to school together. I said, well, that didn't have anything to do with me because I was running my job. I said, I wasn't down here to humor other people. I was down here to run my job. Of course, needless to say, it cost him his job. And there was about 3 cases of that in less than 2 weeks. And I was the one turned in all 3 of them. The other time checkers on other shifts, instead of giving it to them, they just switched me to the other shift for special assignment. I thought I was going to be the only one going to get killed. They never bothered me because they knew that I wasn't afraid to tell the truth with the boss, because I had a boss that would stand right there with you.
Now, could you go back when you were in high school, when this big strike happened in '34? Do you recall it?
Well, I don't remember all of it, but I do know there was families divided because some people in each family wanted to work and others didn't. And it caused a lot of confusions in the families and among friends, because those who didn't want to work didn't want anybody else to work. And they had a lot of disturbance. There was people got hurt through it, and finally they gave them a certain length of time to settle it down, and all those that didn't had to vacate because the houses belonged to Calloway, and a lot of them had to move out, and they could not move in the house with the relatives. They couldn't stay on the village. They had to get out, and it made it real rough on that. And it's like then there was people there about our age now that was too old to get another job, and they were trying to stay on because there wasn't no such thing as retiring. You just had to work it. It made it rough because just lost a lot of your friends and kin people and what have you. And they went places and stayed, and then finally came back and wanted a job and had to beg almost to get one because they were so ugly when they struck.
We just need to pop in a recorder. We're rolling.
Okay, explain that just, and then we'll go to the other.
Well, these Beto men would have to come in and check, and each operator in each department was checked, and they take their information and summarize it and post it to sheets, and post each study to the same sheet in the same department, and then figure up the average there and see what would come up for average of doing. And in that way, then, when they went back to check for review to see if the people had improved, and they did that a lot of times on people especially that did not make the grade, to see if they had improved.
Okay,
Yeah. Could
you go back now and tell us where you lived in the early 30s, and then about the effect of the strike on your neighbors?
Let me think which one. We lived in so few houses, but they were all in the same place.
In the mill village?
Yeah, in the mill village.
Just say, I lived in the mill village.
I lived in the mill village, and one of the houses where we were when the strike came off, we lost people right around us, and they were just hostile. They were just terrible, and it was kind of dangerous to get out when you were young like that. But then as these people that struck had to move out, then the other people would move into different sections of the communities, because they had several different mills, and each mill had their own division to live in. And as somebody moved out of a house, if you wanted it, you had to go down and sign up for it. And you'd just be surprised at how different things was there for about 4 or 5 years, even after they were supposed to be over with the strike. Because people they just wasn't human with you, like very unfriendly with those people who worked on. But of course, if you was going to eat, you had to work. And
why do you think those people took such risks to do that?
Well, that was because of the union that came in here and forced them into trying to get all of them so they could get a raise. See, they weren't paying them a whole lot, and that union was telling them how much they were guaranteed if they worked, and they got to strike, and then won it, how much more they would make, and all they made was worse, because they didn't have what they did have to start with. Because Calloway rented the houses very reasonable. In fact, we lived in one a long time and paid no rent at all. Well, didn't pay any rent until after the strike. No rent was ever paid till after the strike. And the houses was not the best it could be, but they were kept up with a certain degree, and they painted them in the summer. And I remember one particular summer that this man came in and was going to paint one of our rooms, and he put a bucket of paint up on his ladder, and Mama said, now that is going to turn over. And says, you are going to have a mess. Oh, no. He picked his ladder up and did the paint just pour it everywhere. It was this old red, brick red paint. Mama says, you're cleaning that up. Says, because I'm fixing to go. Wasn't no such thing as calling. Wasn't no phones. She says, I'm just fixing to send down to the office to tell your boss what you have just done. That man, I never will forget that guy. He was one of the head painters. He said that's the first time he'd ever had to clean up a mess like that. Mama said, you ought not have made it in my house. But he had that. He had to paint the floor red.
Sounds to me like you had a terrific mama.
She was around him. She was good as gold, but she stood her hands.
So it started to say my mama was good as gold, but
my mom was good as gold, but she stood her hands. You didn't, not even her kids when she was raising them got by, and not her grandkids either. Now they say grandparents are more lenient with their grandkids. Not my mama. There was some that was, I was the youngest, and there was some about 4 years and 6 years younger. They come to Mama's house, they done just like we did. She took care of them.
Did your mother ever work in the mills?
No, she didn't work but about, well, she did work about 3 weeks, I think, and one of my brothers went through and saw her. He didn't know she was working. He was married and wasn't living at home. And he threw a fit, told the man he'd have to fire her. He says, I'm not firing her. So finally, brother raised so much up with the supervisors, so he got her fired. Said Mom had enough to do at home to take care of what was going there. But Mama was a good seamstress, though. And she could help out there and still stay there with the kids, too.
Well, now, one thing we noticed in all of the writings about the textiles in the early 30s is that although more than half the operatives were women,
Mm-hmm.
there's almost no mention of the women in supervisor jobs or anything else. Could you talk about that?
Well, I just took for granted that the men were supposed to be supervisors and wasn't supposed to be any women supervisors. But later, much later, they began to put a few in. And they had a lot of difficult times because the people that they were supervising was people they had worked with. And they resented a woman because they said that she didn't know what she was doing. But we have had some real nice, real supervisors out of some of these women in the last several years that I worked. In fact, I worked for some that I'd rather work for than a lot of men that I'd worked for. But they were...
Could you talk about the colored, when you first started working in the mills and then later?
Well, when I first started to work, the colored people were only allowed to clean restrooms and floors and the machinery. They did only the dirty work. They were not, even no matter how good they were, they never was promoted up above that. And of course they had to stay in their place at the same time. And they had different restrooms for them and different drinking fountains, all that. But in later years, I have worked where the blacks and whites all worked together. And it still had some resentment, but it soon got where it was, they both realized that they had to give. Because usually when something happened between them, both of them went out. They didn't let one go and keep the other one. And I thought that was good, and we had some real good lady supervisors in our later years with the companies.
Now, when I was talking with Bill about that, about the racial matter, he gave Mr. Calloway a lot of credit for that. Somehow he seemed to suggest that the workers would have resisted it, except that Calloway came in. If you saw that, could you tell us how that was done?
Well, the biggest thing I can remember about Mr. Calloway was when he came through the plant, he spoke to everybody, black or white or what have you. And you wouldn't have thought that it was Mr. Calloway, because some of the supervisors that we were working for wouldn't speak to people. But I know one time in particular, I was working on third shift, and that Saturday morning, they told us the first of the week that Saturday morning we had to go directly from work to a meeting because I was sleepy. And it's very easy to go to sleep. We went to this meeting, and I was sitting right in front of some men from the office, and I went to sleep. And they woke me up. I went to sleep again. One man says, he's going to fire you I said, not till he catches me. But he never did catch me because if he had asked me any questions, I wouldn't have been able to answer it when I got back to the office. I said, why could they expect a person to stay up all night on third shift and then come to something like this? It didn't bother me. I wasn't afraid. I just didn't feel like... Well, I really felt that Mr. Calloway wouldn't have been that type of a person, that he would have given you go and take there. Because I never did find him. And one day I was in the barber shop uptown, and I thought everybody had to go clean to go to the barber shop. Here come this farmer in there with his boots on, and they was nasty, and his pants was rolled up, and hat on. I said, he looks familiar, but I don't know who he is. The man over there said, you do know? I said, oh. He said, that's Fuller Calloway himself. He's just come from the farm up here. Says he comes up here anytime and any day, and says whatever he's doing, when he takes notion to come, he just comes on as is. But I just couldn't believe he came up town, and especially to a barber shop. He was one of the... I still think we had the best setup with, because he was part of the thing. We had some grand supervisors under him too. I got a lot of breaks. Sometimes I didn't think I was getting them, but after you stop and study about them, I found out there's a lot of breaks, a lot of different things but that, back to the Beto system, that was just merely to use as an incentive to get the people to work harder to get out more with it.
We've been comparing it with what the rainwater sisters, for example, told us when they first started working in the mills, how they played around.
Yeah.
And it must have made a big difference.
Well, see, years before I went to work, people worked 12 hours a day. They went in at 6 and worked till 6. And they did that on the third shift then. On next shift, they'd work 12. But if some of their family wanted to come down there on that first shift and come in and help them, it was all right. They just come on in and went to work. Nobody said nothing. And that's where a lot of people learned to work in the mill, was going down there while Mom and Daddy and brothers and sisters was down there, and they just climb in the window. They didn't, wasn't no gates around the plants then. Everything was honest, and they just climb over in the window and go to work. And then they said they'd find kids down there 10 to 11 years old working. So of course they wasn't getting paid for it because they weren't on the payroll. And I've heard a lot of people talk about how many times their kids have slipped in, or didn't slip in either because nobody cared. He just crawled up in the window and went on where Mama and Daddy was and went to work. You'd be surprised how many people actually learned to work that they didn't get paid for. It was just amazing to watch them.
Now, we've heard that children would bring their baby brothers down to get nursed.
I didn't actually see that here, never. But I have a sister-in-law whose sister worked at Roanoke, and she told about them bringing them down, and they had a place there in the plant for the women to go and nurse them, and then they'd take them back to the people that brought them, and they'd go home.